Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Hey, Julie. Man, are we good to go? Cool. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining for our roundtable event today. We'll go ahead and get started here. Just want to run through a couple things. So facilities, if you need Wi-Fi, go to the next. Yep. If you need Wi-Fi, the code's over there. Feel free to get on that. And then restrooms are over here up the stairs. There's a first and second floor. And then Pop and Pizza are over there. If you want to help yourself, feel free. The elevator, if you need an elevator, it'll also make a lot of weird hydraulic sounds, so just try to ignore that. What is DevOps Des Moines? We are a local volunteer-led user group, and really for DevOps-minded people in central Iowa. And we have a wide variety of meetings. Like tonight, we're doing our Bring Your Own Problem roundtable event. Usually we have a speaker that just shares a topic. We're looking at doing some workshops. We have monthly meetups. So the fourth Wednesday of the month, we are in person here. And then we also stream on YouTube now. We switched from Twitch, just as a note, to YouTube. And then the purpose of our meetings are really just to learn, teach, share, and network. The volunteers for DevOps Des Moines, we have a different order. No, there we go. So Craig Line, myself, Jonathan Tessman, Matt Vincent, Min Win in the back running AV tonight, John Langling, and we get help from Molly V and Haley on social media. If you want to get in contact with us, you can use the DevOps Des Moines meetup where you might have signed up. We also have a Slack, and we'll get a QR code at the end here for you if you want to join that. Otherwise, LinkedIn's another good option to reach out to us or just talk to us in person. And we are looking for more speakers, so if you're interested in speaking, if you're interested in speaking, like I said, we do a variety of topics. So if you have a shorter topic and you don't want to commit to a full meeting, you could do a lightning talk, like 15 or 30 minutes. If you have an idea for a workshop or just looking for another topic as well, use those survey forms. Write down what you're interested in. We'll try to find a speaker for that. And if you want to share a topic, it doesn't necessarily have to be DevOps focused. It could be really anything. We've had some AI talks, things like that as well. And then I think that's kind of redundant, but if you do want to speak, there's also the Sessionize. So that's just sessionize.com/DevOps Des Moines. And then, yeah, so I'm going to hand it off to John for the Bring Your Own Problems.
So welcome everyone. Glad you can make it. I really like this kind of presentation because my team works remotely, and I miss when we were all together in the office and we would have like 30-minute, an hour long just discussion, technical discussion about problems and all the different ways that we could solve it. Because usually what you find out, there's multitudes of ways to solve a problem, and there's usually a lot of bad ones and a few okay ones with some issues, and there's, like, if you're lucky, there's one really good way to do something. So anyway, the way this format works is everyone has a Post-it note in front of them. You're going to have 5 minutes, and you can write down, and you don't have to say who you're from. You can put your name down if you want to. You don't have to say what company you're from or anything like that, but try to give us like 2 different DevOps related problems, and I'll kind of give you some seeds to plant on what we're kind of looking for and stuff. After the 5 minutes are up, we'll collect all the Post-it notes. Jonathan's going to kind of try to group them, and then we'll pick on which one to do a discussion on first. We'll give it 5 minutes. We'll have a timer there, and then as a group, we can decide if we want to, hey, it's really interesting, we'd like to do 5 more minutes on it, or if we move on. That way we can kind of cover as much topics as possible. Nothing's stopping you if you're really interested and you had a good discussion with somebody else here. A lot of times people stay after the meeting and just chat and stuff. That's a good time to go talk to them about whatever came up during the meeting and ask more questions. So I really encourage that. It's a good way to network. So like I said, our goal is facilitate our discussion and how people might have solved it, or, yeah, you know, you'll find out that people are like, yeah, we have that problem and we did X, Y, and Z, or, yeah, we still have that problem. So hopefully that will be informational and helpful. Next slide. So just to get you thinking about some of this, if you didn't bring a problem with you, like we all carry our work problems with us all the time after work. But anyway, think about DevOps, the life cycle. And in there's different stages in that typical DevOps figure eight life cycle. Stuff around version control, source code, infrastructure as code, configuration management, virtualization like Python and hyper virtualization, stuff on the cloud, observability issues like logging, centralized logging, and all that kind of stuff, continuous integration, quality issues you might have, like, or even, and these are like technical stuff, but there's also human aspects to all of this stuff too. You might have a boss who is resident to, hey, we got to do manual testing on this stuff no matter what. I don't trust any of our test suites to catch everything because I got burned in the past. That's has a human aspect to that I think everyone can relate to. So that's kind of like look at that life cycle and see where you might have a gap where you work or a problem area. So that's kind of what we're looking towards. Next slide. And I guess I kind of covered some of this, but problem examples. Hey, my application is slow. My tests are slow. My builds are slow. Performance and build and release. That's lots of problems in that area. I have 3 or 4 version control tools at my company, and supporting them is drive me nuts. So I have that where I work. I assume you have that too to some extent. Administrators log into servers and make uncontrolled change to the configuration. That's a common one. And then applications running directly on the operating system, and it's on-prem. How do I get it, or where should I move it to? To Kubernetes, Elastic Container Service, or some EC2 node on the cloud, or what kind of things could I do? So that's an example. So, slide 10. There's 5 minutes. Everyone's hopefully got their post-it notes. If 2 would be great, more, you're definitely a star student. So I think you can press the play button on that, Min. And if you have any questions, just shout them out. for you to have a couple of problems, DevOps-related problems that you might be dealing with, or issues that you work with DevOps related. And if you could write them down, we're going to collect them all in a couple minutes, and then kind of group them together, and then have a discussion on the most common ones here.
I thought we were asking niche and obscure questions.
What?
Those get.
I'll take problems, I'll take questions, whatever you do. And I was just going to say, if the 2 minutes are up and you think of something while we're talking, go ahead and let us know. If you have another one, we'll bring it up. And
You gotta help me group though.
unit test, testing techniques.
Test suite.
Ooh, test suite. Wow, we've got some testing. Desire to run all pipelines tests locally the same way. Ooh, I like that one. This is more of education.
Developer environments.
It's an environmental.
Shared infrastructure modules. Infrastructure as code. I'm moving from Jenkins to GitHub Actions.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. Yeah.
With more and more use of cloud, paid by the minutes, caring about cost and infra that they provision. Should be like, you got any cloud-related ones?
Mine was not really cloud related. I don't see any other cloud ones.
Well, here's the testing. This one.
An explanation on that would basically, the minutes is very simple. You need to do 2 separate places. You need to update them.
Yeah, we'll when we get to the card, we'll kind of.
Yeah.
You restate it because I can't really capture like everything in.
This is like, this one's interesting.
Ooh, I like that one. That's a good discussion.
This one's very specific to Docker and database. Logging. So is this all one group?
I think so.
Testing?
That's all test related.
Okay, testing. This is logging.
Okay.
This is right.
This is.
Rule for central IT security and cloud native DevOps. This one's like a process type thing. I think how many do we have? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, let's just go with the bigger one and then start going through them.
Yeah, so here, start with this one.
Okay, well. Did we have these grouped any other way? And maybe we can. Okay. Okay. Well, let's go to the first one real quick,
Yeah, go.
maybe, and then we'll read the next. And once you get done with those, I'll read those off. The next ones off because they're hard to time together. But we'll just read them off and figure out which one you want. So this one I was going to do. There's 3 of them already that are on testing services. Test team is inherited test suite. It takes 30 minutes to run. How to cut this down over time. the other one was unit tests take 15 minutes to complete. Ooh, sounds familiar. Pattern there. Slow. In our deploy pipeline, they are flaky too, forcing us to restart deploy jobs. What can be done to mitigate these issues? And getting buy-in testing techniques. Getting buy-in in testing techniques that aren't widely known to the company. So trying to introduce new technology testing practices that you might not, like for a common example would be like, there's no TDD used at the company and you're trying to introduce TDD there, for example. All right, anybody want to talk about their card first? Otherwise the team has inherited a test suite that takes 30 minutes to run, and how do we cut this time down? So whose is this and what test suite is it?
That's mine, and it was from a previous company, and it was all like Java, but a lot of it turned out was integration tests. A lot of it was integration tests that were taking quite a while to run. And so, it was taking way too long because sometimes it would fail, then you have to fix it, you have to submit, your build and develop pipeline would run another 45 minutes. So,
did you identify any bottlenecks in it?
yeah, mostly it was doing real integration tests with a database that was spun up and run with the inside the pipeline. And for whatever reason, it was just taking a long time.
So you mentioned flaky tests. Flaky tests are always a problem.
Not flaky so much as just lengthy, but we had hundreds of tests. So it was very comprehensive. It just took 30 minutes. So,
Yeah, so
any suggestions for how you could basically get rid of the integration tests but still get quality tests? We did have a lot of stored procedures, so that's part of the why they went that way. So I just thought if anyone else has had that experience.
Anyone want to speak up?
I'd mock the database. In Python testing, you're always mocking the device that you're trying to communicate with.
I'd mock the device. Oh, is it on?
Yeah, that's on.
I'd mock the device, whatever you're trying to, or with a service. So you're trying to connect to a database someplace. Instead of actually calling the database, the networking call, you would mock the device. I'm a computer network engineer. There's a device on your operating system that actually creates that connection. You don't want that to actually happen. You want that system call that creates that, you want to mock that call. And you say, hey, this is what the database is going to return. So when you actually avoid that network latency in all your tests. And if there's hundreds of them, oh yeah, that adds up really fast.
Yeah, this is sort of a loaded question because I sort of know some of the answers, but I kind of wanted to see what else is out there. There are mock database test frameworks like, in-memory databases and other things. So does anyone have any actual technologies that they've used to solve that?
Could any of this stuff be parallelized? Because that's usually most test frameworks have a way to parallelize the test. Otherwise, by default, it's sequential. So you have the parallelization that might be available. And the other thing is the test suites usually have a way of saying, here's a group of these test suites, here's another group of these test suites. When it comes to you might not run the full suite because it takes 30 minutes, so you might run just a subset that, based on your experience, that that would be faster and stuff.
Yeah, we ended up switching all that out to just Makito and really just making the services, when they're calling the persistence store, that part was all mocked just to kind of solve that problem. But it's a lot of work. So It's basically refactoring everything in your app to, I mean, that's a classic example of why you want to do TDD up front, so you don't get into that sort of mess, right?
Yeah, move your, your testing, shift left on it so that you try to do more testing before, and then have different types of testing. So by the time it gets to the release, it's a small number of tests that you would run. Would be another option. And any other comments on that one? There's 19 seconds left. We've got 3 cards, so.
I'm gonna give bold answers of things I've actually done. Yeah, these are bold answers, things I've actually done. Sometimes I've deleted the tests. Yeah, I got a group of, I think, 15 engineers to agree on a bunch of tests to delete them. And we just went by one, and we just said, you know what, we're good on this. This one covers this. And we just had too many tests. Wow.
It's amazing how when you do something like that, you find out I have 5 tests that do the exact same thing, or I have 5 tests that don't test squat.
And then the other option is the bold choice of shifting right and testing on your users more and just accepting more risk. And some of that, sometimes, hey, if you're making pacemakers, no. But sometimes that is, ultimately we live in a complex system. The only way we know it's ultimately going to work is if it's off real traffic, and sometimes that's just a choice you make. You can have rollout policies, but sometimes it is deleting tests and pushing those up to production and better monitoring. So that's my answer.
So this is your comments are kind of following into this next card. I don't know if this is your card or not, but who knows? The team has inherited a test suite that takes 30 minutes to run. How do I cut down this over time?
Deleting tests.
So you got some, good idea. So some of that, I'm a big deal, like, look at parallelization. The number of times that we've had test suites, we just get the test set up. Half the time you're lucky to get a test. It's like, oh my gosh, I figured out how to mock everything. I got it working, and that's it. And then here we start adding all these tests. And then what you find out is, oh, now I got 15 minutes for the test to run. And then it's like, okay, as soon as the team kind of gets tired of waiting 15 minutes every time you do a PR, that's when someone looks into it. It's like, oh, we could turn on parallelization. We can run these suites in parallel. So real easy thing to do. Usually it's a flag, and you can run tests in parallel.
Yeah, it's not fun when it's already parallel and taking that long.
Yeah. So, and that, it also makes you, I guess one thing you didn't touch on that I thought about too is when you have a whole test suite, if the test is always green forever, has never gone red, and you have the logs, the test results over time, maybe that goes into a separate test suite and you don't run that as frequently or something. And so it's not, instead of running 100% of the tests every time, you run these tests that are always green here, maybe run them once, make sure they're green, maybe run them at, twice towards the end or something like that. And then the ones that are problematic, and the same thing applies for like flaky tests. Ones that are flaky, those are just horrible. And again, you can segregate those. You could also kick it back to the test team because, like, hey, we don't accept flaky tests because it just slows things down. In fact, where I work, the flaky tests, they'd actually run the test 3 times. And if you run them 3 times, then it's like, if you get a green one out of it, and then you're pass. But if it failed all 3 times, then it's a failed test. But the problem is, the test suite takes 15 minutes, and as soon as you add that retry, now all of a sudden your test suites might take 15 minutes, they might take 30 minutes, they might take 45 minutes because you're rerunning tests, especially when someone pushes a test that breaks or pushes code that breaks a lot of test suites. So, all right, another test.
That's mine. So
All right.
specifically, the unit tests are in our UI code, and we're using Cypress for that. but they're flaky because Cypress has issue with timing out when it can't find UI elements for whatever reason.
You can't find UI elements sometimes. So
Yeah.
That's what's causing the flakiness.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what causes it, but like it just gets into a bad state for some reason. Like something takes longer than usual, and then, well, once it's kind of like it snowballs because once one thing breaks, then like others might also the rest of the test also starts to fail because then it can't. It's like some dialogue that might have been expected to open isn't there anymore, so then it fails those parts.
Does waiting before you start the tests make a difference, or you testing as you're
You do have
rendering?
retry logic on them. Sometimes it works. Sometimes they're just for some reason it's just a bad run because even with retries it doesn't get out of this state where it gets into a timeout.
With Cypress tests,
Yeah.
for me, unfortunately, instead of like how with the UI test, what you would want to do is click the OK button. You have to reach it into the HTML kind of tag sometimes. It's evil, and you really shouldn't have to do it, but Cypress is evil, so.
I gotta hear that.
Switch to Selenium.
Wow, I mean, this is a huge UI code, so that's gonna take a while if we do.
I think one thing that's helped me too with UI tests is wait for the presence of an element before you start acting on
Yeah,
it.
it should, like, Cypress should do that in theory, and it does most of the time, but it has these random bouts where it can't find it for whatever reason.
Wonder if anyone's worked with a UI testing framework that actually works well.
Selenium.
Yeah.
Selenium is, in my opinion, considerably better than Cypress, but I don't have a lot of experience.
I don't use a lot of UI tests. Is this like Selenium or something, or
No,
Cypress?
Cypress.
yeah, Cypress.
Okay.
Probably
I'm not
selects
familiar, I'm just
things
curious.
from the DOM and tests against what the content is, or different
Yeah.
attributes.
Test like the state, like, oh, this button's disabled when something like, when we have, when like these inputs are this, or if this confirmation code is incorrect, then don't allow the user to continue, like in the wizard dialog.
Another weight that can help too is, I don't know if Cypress has this, but I know like Playwright is another tool that you can use for testing that has like wait for network to be idle. Sometimes.
Yeah, we have smoke tests that actually use Playwright, but our unit tests specifically use Cypress.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's just like waiting for network to be idle could be another thing if there's something loading and you're trying to continue. So unfortunately, it's just like the nature of UI testing. You have to kind of like handle them and just wait exorbitantly. Like,
Yeah, don't do any like, don't just blindly start running tests because you have to query it. I know some, and do all unit testing or UI testing, do they have a capability to do screenshots and stuff like that?
I think they take screenshots. They can take videos too.
I mean, I assume that they would all do that. I know that this test suite I'm familiar with that we use is anything that's abnormal or a failure, it takes a screenshot or a video or something like that, so that you can analyze it afterwards to see what's going on. I guess, I mean, usually, those flaky tests are like just a killer on the productivity of getting those tests done and stuff, and also, erodes credibility of the test suite and what, why are we doing this? You guys are just holding up releases and all that kind of stuff.
Well, the biggest issue is not so much, it's when there's they behave differently when running on a pipeline instead of locally. That's when it really kills us, because then we can't even
So a lot of
debug
times,
it.
that could be timing issues and stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of this, it requires, whoever is running these tests, it requires like a lot of debugging and trying to figure out what it is. And a lot of times when we have something that normally happening, like a failing test, we'll go pull it out and stuff, and we'll put it in, set up a job that all it does is it runs it in, constantly. 24 hours a day. We'll run it and stuff. And then that way we have a failing can start tweaking things to figure out like, you know, is it, this change makes it better or not, you know? And it does require like a lot of time and stuff. I mean, all problems take a lot of time to people. That's what I think. Yep. And I might want to cut off the discussion, but look up other people here afterwards and stuff. I think those were the 3 testing ones. Who's the next one? Okay. And then we'll just, I'll just grab here. So the next one I have, desire to run all pipeline steps locally in the same way that they run on the CI/CD system, but logic is embedded in the pipeline file. Anybody had that problem? It works locally, but it doesn't work on the CI/CD system.
It's not really that. It's not the fact that it doesn't run the same. It's the fact that you have multiple steps, right? You know, so we have pipeline files that, you know, might go through. Let's say you're deploying a Lambda function to AWS or something. You go through and maybe you lint your code and you run some unit tests. Ultimately, you zip it up. You then, you know, include it in your, you know, it's pushed up to AWS using Terraform. Maybe you have to set the initialize state, you know, so basically the Terraform init step. So there's a lot of steps you have to follow through, right? You have to kind of code them in your pipeline file. But you want to be able to kind of test that locally a little bit to make sure that all the steps are set up correctly and it's working properly. And you need it to kind of run the same because you don't want to have to push it to the CI/CD server to kind of verify that all the steps are executing, you know, and that the Terraform is working properly and that type of thing. So the desire to have that consistency between running it locally and on the CI/CD server, just so that you can have some relative confidence that the Terraform's good and that all the steps are set up properly before it gets pushed up. We solved this, but I'm curious if other people have run into that before and kind of maybe how you solve that problem. So the Terraform is setting up resources in the cloud that everything's going to rely on?
Well, no, I mean, if you think through kind of the steps that you follow, so we have a repo that has source code in it, right? It's going to be, you know, included in a Lambda function. And so that source code has to be linted and unit tests and that type of thing. You have Terraform that needs to be initialized, and if you're pushing your state to an S3 bucket, it has to be, you know, initialized in that way. Maybe you're using Terraform workspaces, and so you have to set the workspace. So there's a lot of steps you have to execute one after the other in the proper order, and then ultimately run a Terraform apply to then, say, deploy it to your dev environment or to a preview environment or something like that. And so you have all those steps that you want to verify that they're set up properly and that, you know, your Terraform is set up properly and code linting and all that kind of stuff. You know, and so it's kind of more that orchestration piece, as well as, you know, kind of validating that the individual steps are also working properly.
Would something like test containers help? Or, you know, setting up a Docker environment that mimics what you're running on?
To me, it was more about the steps. So, you know, you think about, so I don't know what kind of CI/CD servers you guys use, GitLab, GitHub Actions, Jenkins file, whatever. You know, you have different stages, steps, jobs, that kind of
So, and were those things on the CI system, but not at the local?
Well, yeah, because you can't run a pipeline file on your desktop, right?
We have that.
You don't have
problem.
anything that can
GitLab
interpret it and
is
execute those steps.
Yeah, so we, where I work is, I mean, the first thing we do is get your really, really great local development environment set up before we even do any of the stuff on the cloud. And that's where we spend most of our time developing is locally. So we make sure that you have helper scripts to run stuff. So usually what I see problems, people put too much stuff in, they put steps in the wrong location. They put it up into the pipeline file, and then how do I run that? How do I run that locally and stuff? And so you need to make sure you get that delineation of what goes into the pipeline and what stuff stays in the local development environment. And then we have scripts. Usually we write scripts like scripts to deploy it, script to run a test, or whatever. And those pipelines, all they do is do the same thing a developer would do, which is call the script to run the test, call the script to run the deploy or the plan, call the script to run the deploy. And so it's not doing anything different than what a local developer does and stuff. And that's, you know, where we run into problems where teams put a whole bunch of stuff. Like I have a team who has a pipeline file, a Jenkins pipeline file written in Groovy that's 1,100 lines long with no testing around it. And then they complain about like, hey, we made a change and we have no way to test. We're like, well, no kidding. All that stuff that you coded in Groovy should be, you know, down where you can run it locally. But I can't do that because I can't call the Jenkins pipeline locally.
Right.
So I don't know if that's what you're running into.
Yeah.
Or,
I mean, it's definitely, I've seen the things you're talking about, so I know what you're saying there. In this case, it's probably not as, and I agree with you, you know, you kind of have scripts that generally, you know, like for using Node or whatever, that might be, you know, running tests and doing different things, you know, so you kind of have scripts and, you know, commands you execute, and you kind of think, well, the Jenkins file, the GitLab file, whatever, will execute those same things, but when you start to have, you know, both the application code that you're kind of linting, testing, all that kind of stuff, and then the packaging, and then the entire Terraform, and the workspace selection, you kind of end up with a whole line of almost scripts, or you could write one script that kind of orchestrates it all, but ultimately that is kind of a repeat of what the pipeline file is doing, right? Because in the pipeline file, you have dependencies between different stages and things that you want to leverage that pipeline file to its fullest extent, right? Because you want to be able to leverage dependencies, say, oh, it broke, so we can't do the next thing. You don't want to have too much logic in scripts that's kind of duplicating what the pipeline file is intended to do. So it's that orchestration, really, and I didn't know if there's other solutions that people have used in the past, you know, to kind of solve that problem. But I think some of the things that you mentioned there kind of help. It helps avoid the need to almost test your
so like
pipeline.
since you mentioned like AWS and you mentioned Terraform, I think there's some tools out there for Terraform to run locally, and local stack would be another option to be able to, instead of creating resources out in the cloud, it creates resources locally, and they end up, you know, again, there's limited support. You can't, it's not every AWS resource you can create locally, but the basic ones you can. Is not, I know some people are using local stack.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that and used that before as well. Yeah, and that's definitely something that, of course, avoids having to deploy to the cloud, but it still doesn't necessarily kind of test your orchestration of the deployment.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I think just for me, like what John was saying, where if you can have scripts that are, like, yeah, I haven't found a good way to orchestrate like a GitHub action pipeline or Jenkins pipeline other than just running those scripts, and then maybe you create like a script that's like running each of them together.
Right, yep.
Using Docker is a big help as well, because you can use the same Docker image that the pipeline's running, and then really at that point it's just setting the environment variables between things. So try to use like environment variables or config files that you can like pass as an artifact. So just ways that you can like simulate locally, but for the most part, it's just if you can encapsulate the actual thing that step's doing into a script, then you can run that locally. You can run that in your pipeline. You can run that wherever really at that point.
And just to let you know, that's kind of the way that I approached it in this situation. It's kind of the way that you described there. It was interesting because somebody came along later after me that was kind of looking at it and trying to figure out a way, because it was kind of a common pattern we had across teams, and so they were trying to kind of figure out a way to simplify that so everybody didn't kind of have to have that script and that type of thing. And he took kind of an interesting approach that actually served us well in another situation. He created a config file that it was our own config file. And so then what it did is it really dramatically simplified what the pipeline file needed to look like for GitLab in this case. And then he had a CLI basically that would run through the steps based off of the config file that was in the pipeline file. And what was really interesting about it was, I mean, it worked well. It did everything we needed to. People didn't have to think about, you know, some of the steps I didn't mention, like, oh, I want you to pull your packages from a artifactory that requires authentication instead of pulling it from NPM or whatever. You know, so there's a lot of steps and security implications to these different steps that you have to execute. But ultimately, what we did is we had to move to GitHub, and because of the fact that he had kind of almost a level of abstraction over GitLab and their pipeline file, we were able to very easily move it to GitHub without really making hardly any changes to this thing. So it's interesting that it actually turned out to help us in another way. I mean, there's pros and cons to it, right? Because you kind of have this homegrown thing that's sitting over the top of it. Somebody new comes in, they might know GitHub, they might know GitLab, but they don't know this new homegrown thing. So, you know, there's definitely downsides to that as well. But I don't know, it was an interesting solution that I thought he came up with that ended up helping us in another way. So.
All right. Good discussion. Any other follow-up? Otherwise, we're gonna move on. Do you have maintenance shared infrastructure modules, and how do you get people to utilize those shared infrastructure modules? I don't know if everyone want to elaborate.
This was mine, so I was just curious, like, if you come up with something in your company, because I deal with this, here's a shared pattern, right, that, you know, is a slight differentiation of what, you know, AWS or Google would put out. We always had problems like, hey, like, use this thing, like, it could, like, give feedback, that sort of inner source stuff. So I'm just curious what types of things people have had success with in helping kind of communicate their ideas internally, if there's not like a team that does that, like, for their job.
I mean, one thing I've seen work decently well is like some type of like demo meeting where people can come to, and then like you have these specific topics, like you could be sharing that module or whatever just to get visibility, or like a specific Teams channel that people can look at.
Yeah, lunch and learns are really nice, you know, and just kind of like what you're talking about. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I find developers sometimes just like a lot of copy pasta between developers from one repo to another. So having a good template or a good cookbook kind of repo to make sure that they are, you know, knowing how to do it and stuff like that is probably anything you do to help them, like you mentioned, you know, demoing it, having some classes, pairing with teams and showing them how to use it, or sitting them down. You know, usually what it is like that first, I don't know, half an hour or whatever, when they're working on something new, it's kind of hard and stuff. You want to make that go smoothly. So, I mean, if that's one way I would look at it. It's like, hey, how about I pair with you and show, you know, and we'll just get this going, at least, not do all the work, but just at least get over that first hump maybe. But it is a problem, especially the larger organization gets and stuff. There's a lot of different ways to do the same thing, and they're not using a common, I have that where I'm at.
Yeah, put in Confluence and it's lost to the ether.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have a way to, do you guys have like brown bag or technical sharing sessions, or could you start something, get a few people interested?
Yeah.
Because that seems like the best
Excuse me.
maybe way to get feedback, and get people interested.
Yeah, I think I've suggested that idea, because I work with like other companies that are looking to do it. So we suggested that. I think a lot of times they just have a hard time, like people will come to the demos, they'll watch things, but then it's like.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So the community, online community group that works on this problem is called innersourcecommons.org.
thank you.
Cool.
I'll have to look into that.
All right. Next, we have multiple developer environments being managed different ways. Whose is that? Because I live in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's our current situation. We also got two different orgs, but I think the crux of the problem is just wondering what everybody else is using for developer environments. Just trying to get a feel for how you manage that, if everybody's just doing it locally. Just trying to figure out.
Well, in the old days, it was like, get this 2-page cheat sheet and go through each step, and your new employee might take them a half a day to 2 days to get all the tools and frameworks and permissions and all that kind of stuff. I'll let someone else say, but what we use a configuration management tool called SaltStack, but it could be Puppet, it could be Ansible, it could be one of the other ones. And we have a mechanism where we we're called roles. So if you're a embedded developer, you select the embedded role, and you're going to get basically all you have to do is install the Salt minion, which is the client piece, and then once they select the role, it will start downloading all their tools, whatever configuration they need, whatever they need for their development. So it could be editors, it could be .NET. Like we manage Windows and Linux, so Windows is a lot harder because of the limitations on Windows. Like you can't update files when people have applications open and all that. Linux is really easy, but that's what we do. And we have, I'd say, 13 or so Windows development environments that people can select through. And when you have 13 of them, there's a lot of reuse. So like everyone in the Windows environment needs like .NET stuff and stuff like that. But then there's the very specific, like if you were on the embedded team, you need this third-party compiler, which requires licensing or like a license setup. All of that stuff is managed. So from the end user experience, what they do is they download this little GUI tool. It's a picker. You pick what development environment, and you hit OK, and it triggers the Salt configuration management run, and it will try to make everything the way it's told to do it. And then it's all controlled under configurations code. So the vendor, if the team says like, hey, we need version X.Y of this tool instead of the previous version, you go update the Salt code base, and then all of a sudden, once that's merged, and if they, we would run a configuration management task like every day at 11 o'clock, and every time they boot up their computer, and that's when they'll get their updates, much like a Windows update kind of thing.
Do you use physical hardware?
What?
Do you use physical hardware for your developers?
For embedded developer, yeah, usually it's a lot bigger, but it's just works. It's like 64 gig of RAM and like as many cores as you can get, so you can run local builds as fast as possible.
So you're running like a physical versus like a virtual machine type thing.
Yeah. So under Linux, so on the Linux side, yeah, we for Linux systems, we run. We used to be running VMware Workstation, and we just recently migrated to VirtualBox. And that gives them the virtualization. So pretty much everyone gets a Windows machine, so they get their Outlook and all that kind of stuff. And then the developers, part of the first, when you get configured as a developer, and you pick a role, it's going to drag down like VirtualBox and install that first. And then all they need to know how to use is Vagrant up, Vagrant shut down. We use Vagrant also as a way to automate and have a nice, easy command line interface to bring up a VM and shut a VM down. And Vagrant's nice because it will talk to Hyper-V, it will talk to VirtualBox, it will talk to the cloud, it will talk to VMware Workstation. It will spin any of those VMs up for you and destroy them.
Good.
Do you have to patch them, or do you just one quick follow-up? Do you have to patch those yourself if you spin them up, or does
Patch them?
back, or do you destroy them and just build them again when you need them?
I didn't quite get.
Patch them, like.
Yeah, patch it. Oh yeah. That's the whole part of that.
Okay.
On a daily basis, like I said, every time that you boot up a Linux box or a Windows box, it will run the automation to make sure you have the latest of the tools or the configuration. And on top of that, at 11 o'clock, we've decided that that's the time where you'll get the daily automation. So between those two, you should be able to pick up the updates. Like if you were powered down and traveling, you won't get them until you first turn them on and stuff. Linux, it just happens, and most of the time people don't notice. But Windows is a pain because as soon as you update stuff, it will be like, hey, you got to reboot. And it's like, oh, great, now I got to reboot, not only for engineering tools, I got to reboot for Windows updates and stuff like that.
I wanted to ask if this is a one repo problem of you've got a bunch of people working on it, they all have different setups so that they're pushing code that ran on their machine, but it's not going to work on someone else's? Or is this a organizational thing of a lot of repos?
Yeah, so I think the former, and we're looking at like
Yeah.
platform called Coder, just getting an IDE, like repeatable environment, or just an easier way to centrally manage an environment like that. So just curious what everybody
too, if you're not developing on Windows, or at least using Windows Subsystem for Linux works, is look into Nix, because with Nix you can specify a bunch of the versions of the tools that they need to have installed, and when they go to that project, they can enter their development environment, and it just puts all those tools under some directory and adds those to that. That or just put it all in Docker.
Yeah,
I'm
dev
sure that's
containers.
been over and over repeated.
Yeah, if you want to talk about more afterwards, there's several of us around here that do quite a bit.
John, see, we have one more.
Okay, there's one more. Is someone really, really want, like, I can go later, but if you have to leave, I would grab your card and we'd talk about it.
No, thank you.
Otherwise, if you can go a little bit later, we'll just keep going through here. So anybody want to grab their card? Otherwise, I'm going to grab whatever is in my hand, and we'll go for that one next. We have varying levels of skill sets with infrastructure as code. Some teams manage their own infrastructure end to end. Others just want something deployed for them. Do my job, would you please? Kind of answer. All right, any more up? Whose is this one, or?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, it's just, again, two disciplines merging two companies, just approaching it two different ways. I think a lot of what you're talking about with the templates and things like that, that's what we're used to on one side, and the other side, we deploy a lot of our own infrastructure. So I'd say where we're at, there's a lot more full stack people who are deploying their own infrastructure, and some other people that need maybe a little more hand-holding. Not sure if that's a common, not sure it is a common problem, but how does that work? How does, probably alludes a little bit to your question too, templates and things like that, but.
Yeah, definitely templates, examples. Like we have a shared repo that's just like examples of here's how you deploy highly available EC2 or Lambda or whatever, just so people can look at that and make sure that's publicized.
And how, I mean, I guess how to do it, is it something like that you set them to a Confluence page, or is it like, hey, here's some interface that we made, if you want a Lambda function, or here's your setup, push a button, go.
So I was gonna say this for Riley's as well, but like putting your stuff in GitHub with like well-documented READMEs, then if you don't have like GitHub locked down for your org, people can just kind of discover those things on their own. So like if they're trying to create, like just as an example, like a Terraform EC2 instance or Lambda, they can just search on that and then get all like references of other code bases that way.
These are like the hotness now.
Yeah.
Everybody wants that developer portal, and so I think Backstage is what all these companies base theirs off of, but then it's like, kind of have to have the common pattern to be like, okay, fill out this form, so if it's in the fill out form, if they don't want to build it, then they might be into that. Then you have to kind of decide, okay, is that automation creating a repo that just has like Terraform with that module in it, and then like runs the init and the plan and says, okay, here's your kind of first pass, now you can make your little tweaks, but maybe that gets them more into, like I started with a few good templates that can't do something crazy wrong. But a lot of people use that as like the way to get started with a template. It's not like that. Send you a readme and it's like, okay, I gotta go install Terraform, just it's all in the pipeline, it goes through for you. I think that's like the golden path at the end, so you're probably gonna start somewhere else, but I know that's what a lot of people do.
What happens to the teams if they don't own infrastructure as code? What's like, what is their experience like?
I mean, inevitably, but inevitably, something that they'll need to work on. Whether that goes to like the cloud engineering team or the cloud engineer, whatever. If they can't do it, someone else will work on it.
And one of the organizations actually splits it. They have their development code, they have their Terraform, and Terraform is maintained by the infrastructure team, and so it creates a real bottleneck. Now, our organization we came from, we completely enabled the app developers to kind of own it soup to nuts, and said everything gets versioned and run from the same repo.
Do you want to do that?
But like Cole said, we would have a DevOps support team that would kind of partner with them when they were first getting comfortable with it. And then, a lot of it is just kind of repeatable patterns. Sometimes you create modules and kind of abstract it so that we don't have, code everything or copy it, that type of thing. But yeah, it's definitely been interesting. And I think it's causing us to just challenge, okay, so what's everybody else doing? We kind of went down the enablement path. They went down kind of that, what felt like a infrastructure, app dev separation pattern, so I was curious what everybody else was
Yeah,
doing.
it sounds like a difference in culture. You mentioned acquisition and stuff like that, and that's always gonna be, you know, what's the maturity level of the one organization, what's the maturity of the other, and then how do you level up and stuff. And the only thing that came to my mind right away is a lot of that comes down to how you integrate those companies or whether they are getting integrated. Because sometimes you have a hands-off approach of the company you're acquiring, and sometimes you don't. I would mix up the teams and get both members from both teams together and try to, because it's a training and culture shift. So one way is to infuse culture. I mean, is the management can all agree and then push it down. The other way to do it is kind of, I don't know, organically by
Yeah.
like.
That's a good call, because I mean, ultimately, these teams, a lot of them are being kind of merged together. So I think probably organically, some of this will happen.
Yeah.
So I think the interesting thing is when you set up like the AWS accounts, permissions and things, you're kind of building them and aligning things to support a certain way of doing things. And so that's probably one of our bigger challenges, is setting it up, you know, to.
I love this discussion. We are out of time, but we're going to wrap it up. And if you want to stay back later, I got these cards that we didn't get to. And if you want to talk about it, we'll be around here and we can talk about it. And just, you know, but I don't want to hold people here, and I want to respect your time. But I really appreciate it. I think next time we should do 2 hours for this or something, because it's always interesting. Thanks for showing up at DevOps Des Moines. Next month,
So next month, July 23rd is the fourth Wednesday. Maria is going to be
That's me.
speaking. We have not figured out the topic yet,
Got
but
3 options
Yeah.
though.
so we'll post more about that.
there's a lot of testing
Yeah.
questions today.
But yeah, stick around. Feel free to grab a pizza if you want to take one home. We've got extra, so yeah. Thanks everyone for coming.
Yep. If you want to continue on, just let me, you know.
I'll just read the cards here. Given a self-service repo, how might you enforce this pull request needs approved by admins while allowing other pull requests to merge with only the approval of code owners?